They gave humanity one seat at the table, one vote, one voice. And when humanity stood up and said, "Don't do this," the entire galaxy laughed. That was their first mistake. Welcome to HFY Endurance Tales. Hit that subscribe button right now, because you are not going to want to miss a single second of what comes next. Drop a comment below. Did the galaxy deserve what happened? The conclave of 12 worlds met on a station that humanity had helped build. Commander Marcus Reed knew that detail better than anyone, because he'd reviewed the original construction contracts 3 times in the last hour, sitting in a chair that was slightly too tall for a human body, in a room that smelled like ammonia and something burning, watching 12 alien delegates decide the fate of 30 billion people. He was 39 years old, former Special Operations, now serving as Earth's senior military attaché to the conclave. He had a jaw that looked like it had been carved from a shipyard, and eyes that his subordinates described as the color of old iron. He wasn't the loudest man in any room. He was usually the last one to speak. Today he had said nothing for 4 hours. The conclave's lead speaker was a Veth diplomat named High Arbiter Sorvan, a creature roughly the shape of a tall man wearing a cathedral, all angular bone plates and rippling throat sacs. The Veth had been the dominant political force in this arm of the galaxy for 600 years. They were good at politics the way sharks were good at swimming. It wasn't cruelty exactly. It was just the natural result of being the biggest thing in the water for so long that you forgot anything else could bite. Sorvan had spent the last 40 minutes explaining, in perfectly translated standard, why the Conclave's decision to reroute the Kepler transit corridor through the Sol exclusion zone was not a violation of the Treaty of Ganymede. It was a reinterpretation, a necessary administrative adjustment in light of the Brethosi fuel crisis.
Keep it open.
Marcus had the Treaty of Ganymede memorized. Article 7, Section 3, Paragraph 2. No member state shall establish, authorize, or permit permanent transit infrastructure within the Sol exclusion zone without unanimous consent of all signatory species, including the human delegation. Unanimous consent. The word unanimous had apparently become complicated since last Tuesday. Seated beside him, in a chair that fit her considerably better because she had 4 knee joints and sat more like a praying mantis than a person, was analyst Vera Shan of the Keth Observation Corps. She was technically a neutral observer. In practice, she had been assigned to shadow Marcus for 8 months, studying human diplomatic behavior for a Keth academic paper that was now, apparently, longer than originally anticipated. Vera Shan had compound optical clusters instead of eyes, 7 deep violet lenses arranged in a subtle arc across her upper face, which meant she could watch 6 things at once without turning her head. Right now, Marcus suspected at least 3 of them were watching him. She leaned close. Close for her meant about 40 centimeters, and said in a voice like wind through dry grass, "Your jaw muscles are doing the thing again." What thing? The thing where they tighten and release in a cycle of approximately 1.3 seconds. I have documented this. It correlates with elevated stress. I'm fine. You are visibly not fine. Your left hand has been flat on the table for 11 minutes without moving. This stillness is an outlier. Marcus looked at his hand. She wasn't wrong. On the raised dais, Sorvan finished his explanation and opened the floor to ratification. 11 delegates raised their approval markers. Bright, efficient, final. Marcus stood up. The room didn't go quiet immediately. It took about 3 seconds, which in diplomatic terms was an eternity. Long enough for several delegates to exchange glances that said, "Oh, this human has something to say." He placed a physical data chip on the table. Old-fashioned, deliberate. "For the record," Marcus said, "Earth Command formally objects to this action under Article 7 of the Treaty of Ganymede. This objection is logged, time-stamped, and transmitted to all 31 human colony systems as of 40 seconds ago. He paused. We are issuing one formal warning. You have 96 hours to suspend construction in the exclusion zone. After that, Earth considers this treaty dissolved and reserves the right to respond accordingly. Sorvan looked at him the way a mountain looks at a raindrop. Duly noted, the Arbiter said, and moved on to the next agenda item. The room actually chuckled. What none of them knew, what Marcus had not said out loud, because the warning didn't require explanation, was that 3 hours ago, Earth Fleet Command had moved the 7th Expeditionary Group out of dock. All 42 ships of it. And nobody in that room had noticed. The 96 hours passed. Not quietly. The Conclave's media network spent most of it mocking the warning. Human posturing reaches new heights. That was the headline on the Veth information relay. The Brethosi delegate gave an interview in which he described humanity as a recently spacefaring species still adjusting to the realities of galactic governance.
All done. Keep
The
it dry for a day or
Dorak,
two.
a reptilian species famous for their bluntness,
Thanks, Doc. Appreciate it.
simply called Earth's position irrelevant. Marcus spent those 96 hours in the mission annex aboard the human diplomatic vessel Steady Resolve, running logistics reviews and sleeping approximately 4 hours per night. He drank terrible coffee from a machine that was never quite calibrated right, and he answered every communication from Earth Command within 15 minutes. Virashan found him on hour 71, sitting in the Annex's observation
Yes, but
bay,
we must
watching
remain cautious
stars.
about the international
They are not
factors.
going to stop,
Aligning
she
sequence
said.
initiated.
It wasn't a
Slight
question.
adjustment on the y-axis.
No, he said.
Got it. Steady.
She settled into
Well
a
done,
seat
engineer.
across from
Keep the
him,
pace up.
her optical clusters dimming slightly, the Keth equivalent of a furrowed brow. I have reviewed the Treaty of Ganymede. Your interpretation is correct. The Conclave is in violation. I know. Then why are you not? She paused, recalibrating. Humans express distress through physical action. You should be doing something. I am doing something, Marcus said. I'm waiting. For what? For the clock to hit 0. It did, 11 hours later, at 0400 station time, when nobody important was watching. The Steady Resolve received a single encrypted burst from Fleet Command. 3 words. Marcus read them, finished his coffee, and went to wake his staff. The 3 words were, Torchlight is active. That was the part that would take the galaxy a long time to understand. It was a logistics operation. The single
Reconfigure the
largest
flanks. Push the
coordinated
advance.
movement of
Status
human
on the
ships
eastern
and
sector.
personnel
Hold
in
position.
history.
Monitor for changes.
Planned over 18 months, rehearsed 6 times, and executed with the kind of boring, meticulous precision that humans had learned over centuries of very hard lessons was worth more than any superweapon. 42 ships from the 7th Expeditionary Group had already been in position for 4
alignment is
days,
shifting.
sitting dark and
Confirmed.
cold
Trajectory is
in the
adjusting.
shadow
What's
of
the
the
new
Kepler
window?
asteroid
Narrowing. We
cluster,
need to intercept.
running minimal power, crewed by people who had been eating ration packs and playing cards, and not talking on any broadcast frequency, because Marcus Reed had personally written the communications blackout protocol. The Conclave's construction fleet, 17 vessels, including 6 massive platform builders, was 40,000 kilometers into the sole exclusion zone when all 17 of them received simultaneous proximity warnings. Not weapons locks, not attack vectors.
Report.
Proximity
All systems
warnings.
nominal, sir. Stay
Because
sharp.
42 human ships had just lit their drives at once, and they were everywhere. The construction fleet commander, a Brethosi captain named Geth, later testified that his first instinct was that it was a sensor malfunction.
Clear the path.
No
Keep it open.
fleet, he said,
sir.
moves into position that silently. He checked his instruments 3 times before accepting that what he was seeing was real. By then, Marcus was on an
Admiral,
open
these red
channel.
zones indicate primary
This is
hazards.
Commander Marcus Reed
We
of
must deploy
Earth Fleet
countermeasures
Command,
immediately.
he said, his voice carrying the particular flatness of a man who had prepared this speech and was delivering it exactly as written. You are operating in violation of the Treaty of Ganymede within the Sol exclusion zone. You have 30 minutes to reverse course and exit the zone. Your vessels will not be fired upon during withdrawal. All crews will be permitted to leave unharmed. This offer expires in 30 minutes. Read out.
Is it safe?
He closed the channel.
All right.
Vera Shan, standing at the back of the bridge because she had refused to leave, said, "You gave them an exit." "I always give them an exit. The Conclave will call this an act of aggression." "They'll call it whatever they want," Marcus said. "The recording exists. 30 minutes from now, it's going to exist in 100 different archives, and everyone watching will know exactly what we said." 22 minutes later, 3 of the 17 construction ships began reversing course. 14 did not. Marcus watched the timer. Around him, his crew was very quiet. These were professionals. They knew what 30 minutes meant. When the clock hit 0, Marcus said, "Execute Torchlight Phase 2. And every single weapon system on 42 human ships came online simultaneously. Not firing, just visible, lighting up on every sensor grid in range, like a sunrise made of cold mathematics. The remaining 14 construction ships had about 6 seconds to process what they were looking at, before their own commanders began ordering emergency reversals. But 6 seconds is a long time when you're already being outmaneuvered. The last ship cleared the exclusion zone boundary at 23 minutes past the deadline. The corridor construction was halted, and on the Conclave station, High Arbiter Sorvon convened an emergency session, not to negotiate, not to acknowledge the warning, but to formally declare humanity's actions a hostile provocation and authorize a military response. 11 hours. He did not know that Marcus Reed had anticipated this outcome to within a 6-hour margin and had filed the appropriate contingency orders 17 days ago. He also did not know what those orders contained. Nobody outside Earth Fleet Command did. Not yet. The Conclave's joint military force was called the Oversight Armada. It existed, at least officially, to maintain order along contested transit routes and enforce Conclave rulings. In practice, it was the reason smaller species voted the way they were told. It consisted of over 300 vessels spread across 9 systems. Humanity had known its composition, patrol schedules, fuel depot locations, and command rotation cycles for approximately 4 years. Marcus had not enjoyed acquiring that information. The operation that produced it had cost 2 agents their lives, and a third her career. He carried their names on a list he kept in his left breast pocket. He had never once let himself forget that good intelligence was paid for by real people. The Armada's first move was textbook. Concentrate force at the Sol approach corridor. Establish a blockade. Wait for Earth to capitulate under economic pressure. It was the same move the Veth had used 11 times in 600 years.
Thanks, Doc. Appreciate it.
It worked. It always worked. Except Earth wasn't at the Sol corridor. The 7th Expeditionary Group had already moved again. Vera Shan found the new coordinates in the mission logs and stared at them for a long moment. "That's the Breathosi fuel relay at Kappa Station," she said. "Yes," Marcus said. "You're not attacking it." "No." "Then what are you?" She stopped. Her optical clusters shifted focus in a way that meant she processed something and didn't like the answer. "You're cutting off their fuel supply before the blockade is even established."
Well done, engineer. Keep
"We're
the
not
pace up.
cutting it off," Marcus said. "We're rerouting it. There's a difference." "To where?" "Nowhere hostile. The relay stays operational. It just requires new routing authorization, which we're happy to provide to any Conclave vessel that formally acknowledges Earth's territorial rights under the original treaty." Vera Shan was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is not a military action. That is a stranglehold disguised as paperwork." "The galaxy taught us paperwork," Marcus said. "We're fast learners." The Armada's response was to accelerate. 300 ships don't turn on a dime, but they can move when they're angry. And the Veth Fleet Commander, Admiral Dessa, a career officer with 40 years of Armada service, ordered a rapid approach directly toward the Sol system, apparently concluding that speed and mass would solve the problem the way they always had. What Admiral Dessa did not account for was the Calderon Shoal. The Calderon Shoal was a debris field approximately 8 light hours from Sol, a graveyard of a gas giant that had shattered 3,000 years ago. It was navigable, barely. It required precise jump calculations and careful sublight threading through the denser debris clusters. Every human navigator knew it intimately, because from childhood, human pilots trained on hazard zones. They ran simulations in asteroid fields and high radiation corridors and ionized gas clouds. They did it because humanity's early expansion had been poorly funded and dangerously improvised. And the pilots who survived were the ones who could fly in places where nobody sane would follow. The Armada entered the Calderon Shoal on standard approach vectors, at which point they discovered that the shoal had changed. Not dramatically. Not in any way that would show up on a standard navigation update that hadn't been refreshed in the last 30 days. But 6 human survey ships had spent 3 weeks leaving transponders, drift map debris shifts, and updated hazard beacons, all operating on frequencies that Armada navigators weren't monitoring, because why would they be? The lead elements of the Armada slowed, then stopped, then spent 11 hours recalculating approach vectors while their fuel reserves quietly drained. And while that was happening, on the surface of the small colony world of Kepler's Landing, a human settlement of approximately 40,000 civilians that the Conclave had privately designated a pressure target in internal communications that Earth intelligence had intercepted 8 months earlier. A very different operation was already underway. Marcus had received the intercept. He had read it 3 times. Then he had added it to a secured file he'd labeled simply Record.
We're coming.
He did not tell his crew what was in it. Not yet. But his hand had gone flat on the table again and stayed there for a long time. Kepler's Landing didn't know it had been selected as a pressure target. Its 40,000 people were miners, farmers, and the families of both. They had a local security detachment of 80 personnel and 2 patrol craft. They were, by any military calculus, completely indefensible, which was why Marcus had sent a different fleet there entirely. Not the 7th Expeditionary Group, which everyone was watching, but the 3rd Rapid Response Group, running dark, 3 weeks ahead of any projected Armada timeline. The 3rd's commander had very specific orders. Those orders began with 2 words, protect first, and ended with 3 more, then establish consequence. The 3rd arrived at Kepler's Landing 14 hours before the Armada's advance elements cleared the Calderon Shoal. They found something waiting there that nobody had planned for. The advance elements weren't Armada regulars. They were Dorak mercenary contractors, hired privately, paid off the Conclave books, and already in the system, and they were moving toward the civilian settlement, with weapons hot. The first Dorak strike craft cleared the atmosphere of Kepler's Landing at 0340 local time, while most of the colony was asleep. Commander Travis Webb of the 3rd Rapid Response Group saw it on his tactical display and said, very quietly, all stations, weapons free. Protect the settlement, nobody gets through. What followed was not a battle in the traditional sense. It was closer to geometry. 18 Dorak strike craft against 22 human interceptors in the airspace above a sleeping mining colony. The Dorak flew in standard aggressive patterns, fast, direct, overwhelming. They were good. In a straight fight, against equivalent numbers, they would have won. The human pilots didn't fight straight. They fought ugly, pulling maneuvers that bordered on structurally inadvisable, using the colony's own geography as cover, threading between ore processing towers at speeds that should have been suicidal and weren't. because
recommend
every
you
single
review
one
it
of them had
immediately.
trained in exactly this environment in simulation for the last 4 months. Webb had made sure of that personally. 6 Dorok craft were disabled in the first 4 minutes. The pilots were extracted alive. Webb's standing order was that ejected pilots were rescued, not left to die, regardless of circumstances. 3 of his own interceptors took serious damage. 1 pilot was injured. Not 1 munition reached the colony's surface. Not 1. The remaining 12 Dorok craft pulled back at 0352, and Webb was already broadcasting on emergency frequencies, getting the colony's evacuation protocol running, and filing an incident report
Doc.
with
Appreciate
Marcus
it.
Reed that included the Dorok contract documentation his intelligence team had lifted from a disabled craft's data core. Marcus received that file aboard the Steady Resolve at 0401. He opened the secure archive labeled Record and added it. Then he opened a channel to Earth Command. This is Reed, Authorization Delta 7. I'm requesting permission to release the full evidence package to open broadcast. There was a pause of approximately
Yes, but
40
we must
seconds,
remain cautious
the time
about
it
the
took for the
international
relevant
factors.
authorization to
Aligning
travel up
sequence
the chain
initiated.
and come
Slight
back
adjustment
down.
on the y-axis.
Granted,
Got it.
said the
Steady.
voice on the other end.
Well done, engineer.
Reed,
Keep the pace
are
up.
we at war? Marcus considered the question. We've been at war since they filed those construction orders, he said. We're just at the part where they find out. He closed the channel and turned to his communications officer. Broadcast package to all conclave stations, all independent relay networks, and specifically to the Keth Observation Corps frequency. He looked at Virashan. Your people are going to want to see this. Virashan had been standing very still since the Kepler's landing intercept came through. She had read the internal conclave document, the one that designated a civilian colony as a pressure target, and her optical clusters had done something Marcus had never seen them do before. They'd gone dark, all 7, for about 3 full seconds. They were going to harm civilians. As leverage, yes. And they hired contractors to ensure deniability. Yes. And you have documentation. Every piece of it.
Push the advance.
Communications,
Status on the eastern
payment
sector.
records,
Hold position.
operational
Monitor for
orders,
changes.
timeline. Marcus paused. It's clean, Virashan. No holes, no ambiguity. Her optical clusters came back online, slowly, one by one. When all 7 were lit, they had shifted from their usual deep violet to something closer to white.
The alignment is
In
shifting.
Keth physiological
Confirmed.
terms,
Trajectory is adjusting.
Marcus had
What's the
learned
new window?
white
Narrowing.
optical
We need to
coloring
intercept.
indicated a state they had no direct human translation for, something between fury and the resolution that follows it. Broadcast it, she said. Already done. Across the conclave network, the evidence package hit every major relay simultaneously. Every delegate, every admiral, every journalist with a receiver. It hit the Keth Observation Corps Public Archive, and the independent Brethosi news networks, and the 17 neutral species who had been watching this crisis develop
Report.
from a
All
careful
systems nominal,
distance.
sir. Stay sharp.
On the conclave station, High Arbiter Sorvan was woken at an hour he found deeply offensive, and told that human intelligence had just published a comprehensive record of a covert operation that his council had officially never
Clear the
authorized.
path. Keep it open.
His response was, reportedly, to sit down very slowly and say nothing for almost 2 minutes. Meanwhile, the Armada, still threading the Calderon Shoal,
Admiral, these red
still
zones
burning
indicate
fuel,
primary heat
still
signatures.
recalculating,
We must deploy
received
countermeasures
new orders from
immediately.
Sorvan. Disengage and hold position pending diplomatic resolution. Admiral Dessa forwarded the order to her fleet. And then she received a secondary transmission, not from Sorvan, but from the Veth Military Command directly. It was 2 lines. The first line ordered her to continue the advance regardless of the Arbiter's diplomatic instructions. The second line reminded her that her family held land under Veth military protection. Dessa stared at those
It's all right.
2
Come on
lines
up.
for a long time.
Okay, we're coming.
Then she forwarded
You're doing
them,
great.
both
Keep
of them,
moving.
to
Almost
Marcus Reed's secure channel with a single attached note. I was a soldier before I was an instrument. Marcus read it twice. He added it to the file. And then he issued the order that the 7th Expeditionary Group had been waiting for since the mission began. Not an attack, not a bombardment, but a precision operation that his tactical team had spent 11 months preparing. Every Veth military
Tracking
command
anomaly in
relay in the
sector
sector
Delta. Confirmed.
went
Pattern
dark
shifting.
simultaneously,
Compensating now.
Steady.
isolated,
Monitor for escalation.
cut from the network by a coordinated series of signal interruptions, so precisely timed that the Veth comm engineers, who were very good at their jobs, would need approximately 6 hours to restore full function. 6 hours was enough time for the Armada's lower commanders, receiving no orders, operating on their last instruction, hold position, to do exactly that. The advance stopped. 300 ships stopped. Not by superior firepower, not by a devastating attack, but by the careful, patient, maddening application of human logistics and information control. And in the silence that followed, something else happened. Something Marcus hadn't planned for. Something nobody had planned for. Vera Shan's personal communicator chimed. She looked at it. Her optical clusters went white again. "The Keth Council," she said quietly, "has just issued a formal statement." "What does it say?" She read it once to herself first. Then she looked up at him, and her voice, when she spoke, was steadier than he expected. "It says that the Keth Observation Corps has completed its review of events in the Sol exclusion zone at Kepler's Landing, and of the evidence package transmitted by Earth Fleet Command. It says the evidence is credible, and the Treaty of Ganymede violation is clear." She paused. "And it says the Keth Council is formally requesting that the 12 species of the Conclave stand down and submit to independent arbitration. And if they refuse?" Vera Shan looked at her communicator again. "Then the Keth Council will recognize Earth's right to enforce the treaty by any means necessary and will not interfere."
We recommend you review it immediately.
Marcus sat with that for a moment. The Keth were not a military power. They didn't have a fleet that could change the balance of force. But they had something more valuable in this moment. They had credibility with every neutral species watching. And they had just handed humanity a legitimacy that no amount of firepower could manufacture. He looked at Vera Shan. "Did you know your council was going to do that?" "No," she said. And then, after a pause, "But I sent them my field notes, all
Clear the
8
hoist.
months of them."
Panel 90%
For the first time in what felt like weeks, something close to a smile
Copy that.
crossed
Watching the
Marcus
grid.
Reed's face.
All
Then,
done.
his tactical
Keep it dry
officer
for a day or
said,
two.
"Commander, the Veth Military Command
Thanks,
has
Doc.
just
Appreciate
issued
it."
a direct broadcast. They're calling the Keth statement an act of war against Conclave solidarity." Marcus stood up. The smile was gone. "Then we moved to Phase 3, he said. And Phase 3 was the one he'd hoped, with everything in him, they would
Primary
never need.
objective is
Phase 3
stabilizing
was
this region.
simple.
We
That
move
was
in
what made
and
it
establish a
terrifying.
presence.
For 11 months, while Torchlight's
look
logistics
at the data
components were
points
being
here, we can
rehearsed,
see a
and the
clear
Calderon
upward trend.
Shoal was being mapped,
Yes, but we
and the
must
intelligence
remain
on
cautious
Kepler's
about the
landing was
international
being
factors.
verified,
Aligning
a
sequence
separate team
initiated.
within Earth
Slight
Fleet
adjustment on
Command
the Y-axis.
had been working on a single question.
Well
If
done,
the Conclave
engineer. Keep the
commits
pace
fully
up.
to military force, what do we do? The answer they'd arrived at was not a superweapon. It was not a doomsday device or a planet killer, or anything that would require humanity to become what it was fighting against. It was a shipyard. Specifically, it was the Veth primary military shipyard at Oran Station, a facility producing approximately 40% of the Armada's new construction, sitting in a system that was technically neutral under the original Conclave Charter, which meant the Veth had never bothered to heavily fortify it. Technically neutral had seemed like a minor detail until humanity pointed out that it was recorded, time-stamped, and legally binding. The operation to reach Oran Station required passing through the Tessian Drift, a high radiation corridor that most species avoided entirely due to the electromagnetic interference it caused in standard shielding systems. Human shielding systems had been redesigned 11 years ago after a disaster in the Belt
Reconfigure the
colonies.
flanks. Push the advance.
The new design
Status on the eastern sector.
was heavier,
Hold position.
more
Monitor for
expensive,
changes.
and substantially more resistant to radiation. The retrofit program had been expensive. Nobody had thought it was a particularly exciting budget line. It meant that 5 human ships could transit the Tessian Drift at full combat readiness. They did. On the other side, they emerged at Orin Station, with weapons locked, not on the station itself, but on its power generation ring. 3 shots in sequence would disable the ring and shut down production for approximately 8 months without destroying the structure or harming the 3,000 personnel aboard. The 5-ship Elements commander broadcast a single message to the station. Evacuate non-essential personnel now. You have 2 hours. This is not a bluff. It was not a bluff. Meanwhile, Marcus sent a direct communication to High Arbiter Sorvan, directly to his personal console, time-stamped and recorded.
Stay sharp.
Arbiter, the evidence is public. The violation is documented. The Kepler's landing operation is documented. Orin Station is under our guns. Admiral Dessa has provided testimony. Marcus paused.
Clear the path.
I'm not interested in destroying your shipyard. I'm not interested in a war that costs us both more than either of us can calculate. I am interested in one thing: the Conclave formally acknowledging the treaty violation, submitting the relevant decision-makers to independent tribunal, and restoring the terms of the Treaty of Ganymede in full. He let that settle. You have 4 hours. After that, I am no longer the one making decisions. Read out. He closed the channel. The bridge was silent. Vera Shan said quietly, and if they still refuse? Marcus looked at the display. At the 300 ships sitting in the Calderon Shoal, burning fuel, waiting on orders that kept getting interrupted. At the 5 ships sitting at Orin Station.
It's all right.
At the
Come on up.
42 ships of the 7th, repositioned again, sitting between the Armada and Sol, like a wall made of patience and careful math. Then we hold, he said. We don't fire first. We don't escalate. We hold, and we let them choose what happens next. Even if they attack, we respond, we defend, we document. He looked at her, and we make sure every neutral species in this galaxy has a complete record of every single thing that happens.
Compensating.
That's the war, Vera Shan. Not the one with weapons. The one where the galaxy has to decide what it actually believes. The 4 hours passed in a silence that had texture to it. The particular weight of 300 ships and 3,000 station personnel and 40,000 civilians on Kepler's landing, and 30 billion people across 31 colony worlds, all waiting on the decision of one old political creature who had for 600 years never once had to take a warning seriously. At 3 hours and 51 minutes, Sorvan responded. Not with defiance, not with attack orders, with a single line transmitted to every relay in the network simultaneously, which meant he understood that this moment was already history, and he was choosing his place in it. The Conclave of 12 Worlds requests ceasefire terms. Marcus closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then he opened them and started typing. The tribunal took 4 months to convene and 6 months to complete. It was held at Keth Prime, neutral ground, under Keth arbitration, which everyone agreed to partly because the Keth had earned it, and partly because the alternative was letting humanity pick the venue, and nobody particularly wanted that. Marcus Reed attended every session, not as a witness. He'd submitted his testimony in writing, all 400 pages of it, with every piece of documentation attached. He attended because he thought it was important that a human face be present, calm and visible, every day. Not triumphant, not angry, present. Vera Shan attended too in her official capacity as Keth observer, though she and Marcus sat on opposite sides of the chamber and maintained the strict professional distance that the proceedings required. She had submitted her own report, 31 months of field notes. It was, by Keth academic standards, not a research paper anymore. It was a primary source document for a civilizational inflection point. And it was taught at the Keth Institute of Interspecies Studies within a year of the tribunal's conclusion. She had written, in her summary, "I observed a species that was consistently told its warnings were irrelevant,
Panel 90% aligned.
and consistently behaved as though it intended to be taken seriously
Watching the
anyway.
grid.
I initially interpreted
All
this
done?
as a failure
Keep it
to
done for a day or
understand
two.
political reality. I now understand
Doc.
it
Appreciate
differently. They were not refusing to accept reality. They were refusing to accept the reality others had decided for them. This distinction, which I did not fully appreciate when I began this study, is perhaps the most important thing I have learned. The tribunal found, formally and on
Primary
record,
objective
that the
is
conclave of
stabilizing
12
this region.
worlds had
Move in
violated the
and
Treaty of
establish a
Ganymede.
presence.
It found that the internal designation
at
of
the data
Kepler's
points
landing
here, we
as a
can see a
pressure
clear
target
upward trend.
constituted preparation
we
for a
must
war
remain
crime
cautious about
under
the
the
international
Galactic
factors.
Conduct Standards
Aligning
that the
sequence
conclave
initiated.
itself
Slight
had
adjustment on the
authored.
y-axis.
It found that the private authorization
engineer.
of
Keep the pace
Dorak
up.
mercenary contractors for an off-books operation against civilian infrastructure established individual criminal liability for 7 specific conclave officials, including 2 who had, by the time the findings were read, already quietly resigned. High Arbiter Sorvan was not among those 7. He had been careful. He always was. But he had been removed from his position by the Veth governing body 6 weeks after the ceasefire, in what was described publicly as a voluntary retirement, and understood by everyone as exactly what it was. Admiral Dessa was not charged with anything. Her transmitted testimony, and the risk she'd taken in sending it, was entered into the tribunal record as evidence of exactly the kind of moral courage the proceedings were trying to define and protect. She returned to her homeworld. Marcus sent her a message the day the verdict was announced. It was 3 sentences long.
Reconfigure the flanks.
She
Push
replied
the
with
advance.
2 words in
Status
Veth,
on the eastern
which
sector. Hold
translated
position.
approximately
Monitor for changes.
to, "It was enough." The new Treaty of Keth Prime was signed by 29 species, 17 more than had originally signed at Ganymede. The Sol exclusion zone was reaffirmed with specific enforcement language. An independent compliance commission was established, with rotating
alignment is
membership
shifting.
that included for the
Confirmed.
first
Trajectory
time
is adjusting.
human
What's the new
officers
window?
in senior
Narrow it. We need to
roles.
intercept.
Marcus was offered a promotion and a desk job and a medal. He took the promotion. He declined the desk. The medal he accepted because his mother would never have forgiven him otherwise. On the last day of the tribunal, in the public gallery where citizens of 24 species had gathered to hear the final verdict, Virashan found Marcus standing at a window overlooking the Keth capital city, a place that looked at this distance like someone had grown a forest and then lit it from inside.
Report. All systems
"I have a
nominal,
question,"
sir.
she
Stay
said.
sharp.
"Go ahead. When you stood up at the conclave session, when you placed the data chip on the table and gave them 96 hours," she paused, "did you believe they would comply?" "No." "Then why give the
Clear the
warning
path.
at all,
Keep it open.
if you believed
Yes,
it
sir.
would be ignored?" He turned to look at her. Because the warning wasn't for them. She held his gaze with all 7 optical clusters, which were, he had learned to read
Admiral,
this,
these red
the
zones
steady
indicate
deep
primary
violet
heat signatures.
of focused attention.
We must deploy
Who was it
countermeasures
for?
immediately.
Everyone watching, he said. Every neutral species, every junior delegate who was going to have to decide which side of this they stood on. Every historian who was going to write about it afterward. He paused. And for us. So we knew. So we knew we'd done it right. Virashan considered that for a long moment. Outside, a Keth aerial transport drifted past the window, quiet as a thought.
We're coming. Is it
"I am
safe?
going to quote you in the revised edition," she
All
said.
right, come on up.
"I assumed you
Okay, we're
would.
coming.
I want to be
Doing
transparent
great.
about
Keep
that."
moving.
Almost there.
I know. My original paper was titled Observations on Human Diplomatic Intransigence and Its Consequences. I have changed the title. To what? Virashan's optical clusters shifted, all 7, to that particular shade of white that Marcus had come to recognize. "They told you," she said.
Tracking
"A
anomaly
complete
in sector
record."
Delta. Confirmed.
Marcus
Pattern
looked at her.
Compensating now.
Steady.
The lights of the
Monitor for
Keth
escalation.
capital city moved through the window behind her, slow and luminous and deeply strange. "That'll do," he said. "If this story hit differently than you expected, if you felt that moment when the galaxy finally understood what it had ignored, then you already know what to do. Drop a comment below with your honest take. Did the Conclave deserve what came for them, or was there a moment they could have chosen differently? Share this with someone who needs to hear a story about patience being the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy. And if you're not subscribed to HFY Endurance Tales yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button, because the next story, it starts where the warnings end.